Hello, how are you?
Oh, I can't hear you. Hello?
Hi. Oh. Hello, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you?
Pretty good.
Awesome. Yeah. So, I finally graduated.
Yeah, I know. I heard. So that's
Yay.
great. Yeah. So what have you been up to?
Sorry, what?
What have you been up to these days?
I am starting a startup called basically a restorative justice hub for people for whom, like, they want to apologize or they want a kind of civil court system, but the statute of limitations for them has ended or something, like stuff like that.
Okay.
I have been up to, let's see, also, like, I'm co-founding another startup that you may have heard of from Jesse. It's called Make Truth Matter Again, with a few friends of ours. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm a housewife now.
Oh, yeah.
I think that covers it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's good. Sounds like you've been actually pretty busy.
Well, I feel like these past few days are just like, no school, I'm happy. You know? Like, I don't know, busy is what I say, but.
Yeah.
I did it!
Hello.
Morning.
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 Angela.
How'd you sleep?
Pretty good. Best in a while, actually.
Oh, nice. I will be muting myself and putting some white asparagus.
Okay, all right. Well, yeah, just join in if you have anything to say. I'll be checking in with you. Yeah, just to make sure that you're... Yeah.
So German.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So, hello, Jesse. How are you?
Not bad. I think Anusha might be joining, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I saw her in the Slack, and I talked to her. I welcomed her into the Slack. So, yeah, if she comes in, great. But yeah, she's in the Slack now. So, so let's see. I guess we can get started. Welcome to the meeting. I know we've talked about a lot of things on Slack this week, and we've had some conversations this week, I guess. Why don't we start with the Slack review? So this is something we've been doing for the last several weeks. Can you see my screen?
I can't.
You can't?
No.
Let me see. There's Anusha.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
All right.
Oh, I think my screen froze. That's why I can't see it.
Okay.
Come back in.
All right. So, hello, Anusha. How are you?
I'm doing well. Yeah, I've never used this platform before.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like Slack, or it's kind of like Zoom, or some of the others. It's just an open source version of it. So, yeah. So, could you introduce yourself a little bit?
Yes. Let me see. Let me figure out how to show myself.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh. Okay, I don't know how to show myself, so I'm just going to go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so my name is Anusha. I'm a recent psychology graduate student. I have a master's in psychology, and in undergrad I studied neuroscience. I have some lab experience in pharmacology, and yeah. And I guess like the main reason why I wanted to join this lab is I've never had lab experience where it's like multidisciplinary, if that makes sense. Like where I'm working with like people who have studied different things.
Right.
I've always worked in an environment where I'm learning from people who are studying the same thing. So I think it'll be a really good experience. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. Jesse forwarded me your CV, and it looked pretty good. It looked pretty exciting. So you've done a lot of stuff with neuro and psychology, and yeah, I mean, my experience has been that typically labs are, well, it depends on the lab, but a lot of labs, especially like in neuroscience, are focused like in clinic, like laboratory neuroscience, where you're doing, it's usually focused on like one or two fields, like one or two sort of approaches. Yeah. So like when I was in a stem cell lab, and I was like the only computational person there, but I did also do stem cell biology in that. So I had like I had a doubly trained skill set, but like everyone else, they were speaking this language of molecular biology, and they're talking about like cell biology, and then if you're talking about neuroscience, or some people were into neuroscience too, but then like you had also had like computational science, but I was like the only one who could speak that language a lot of times. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Nice to have you. And again, you don't have to have your camera on. You can just I'll be checking in with you periodically during the meeting. And
okay.
Okay. Thanks. So Jesse has 2 instances now, or
yeah, I'm sorting out what I'm in a slightly different location right now. So for whatever reason, I totally couldn't log on the previous time, but now I can. So I don't really know what to say about that. But
well, yeah. Sometimes it's a little glitchy. So, but we'll get going. Let's see. Let me share my screen here. Okay. So first we'll do the Slack review. So our Slack channels are pretty active this week, as they usually are. Just depends on the channel. So I see we have a new channel here. This is something Jesse created this week. It's called Bioevolution. So this is, I guess, just kind of for evolutionary biology, and because we do talk about cultural evolution, but I take it that's not part of this channel. So we have a tweet from Adam Saffron that Jesse posted. This is about the emergence of creativity in modern humans. This is actually, I think, a paper that was tweeted out, The Evolution of Genetic Networks for Human Creativity. So this is a new paper that's come out in Molecular Psychiatry. This is something that talks about creativity in humans and how it's sort of evolved. They're actually looking at genes in chimpanzees and Neanderthals that are shared with humans. So, if you know anything about human evolution, chimpanzees are our nearest common ancestor. If you exclude all the other archaic Homo species in the genus Homo. So you can use those kind of comparisons, chimps, humans, and Neanderthals, as a sort of a three-way comparison to look at the evolution of different things. So Neanderthals are sort of not, it's a debate whether they're a separate species, but they're definitely going to share a lot of things with us, but there are also going to be differences in terms of the genetic, some genes for different things. And when I mean differences in genes, there, maybe mutations that Neanderthals would have and modern humans wouldn't. So they look across the number of genes, and they're evaluating this in terms of like whether the gene is protein coding or what is actually transcribed into something that is useful to the to the brain in that species, or taxon, in the case of Neanderthal. So, let's see. The genes that cluster in association with those found only in modern humans are overexpressed in brain regions involved in human self-awareness and creativity, including late myelinating and phylogenetically recent regions of neocortex for autobiographical memory and frontal parietal and temporal regions, as well as related components of cortico-thalamo, pontal cerebral, cortical, and corticostriatal cortical loops. So this is just areas of the brain where that interact with the neocortex, but also parts of the neocortex. We conclude that modern humans have more than 200 unique non-protein coding genes, regulating co-expression of many more protein coding genes and coordinated networks that underlie their capacities for self-awareness, creativity, pro-social behavior, healthy longevity, but these were not found in chimpanzees or Neanderthals. So this is a nice paper on brain evolution. You should read it. And then, let's see. So that's the bioevolution channel. We also have a brain organoids channel. I'm pointing this out to Anusha because she's probably not familiar with the structure of our Slack. We talk actually also about brain organoids, and we haven't talked too much about things recently in this channel. But, they're these what they do is they take a bunch of stem cells and they culture them in a three-dimensional gel. And they're able to differentiate these cells into different types of germ layers, different types of differentiated cell. And they can get them to grow in these collectives or these colonies called organoids. And so they can use organoids for a number of things. They can look at how embryos are formed. They can look at they can create like different sort of proto organs. And one of the organs that they can recreate is the brain. So they can create like a sort of a mini brain or a small brain where you have a bunch of different differentiated cells working together. There's some, connectivity between the neurons, and they call these things brain organoids. And so we've talked about that in this channel. You might want to check out a lot of these papers. We haven't really been able to get this project off the ground because, they're open data sets, for example, but we don't really, we've never really been able to get it off the ground for some reason. So I'm just pointing that out as a means maybe to go forward on that. The Bradenburg Vehicles channel, we have a lot of stuff here. So the first piece of news here is that we submitted some papers to the A-Life conference, and we received notification that they were rejected from that conference. One of those papers has to do with this Bradenburg Vehicles work. And so some of the messages, I don't know if they're in here, where exactly they are. Okay, this is it here. There were a lot of criticisms. We're going through the reviewer responses now, and we're probably going to just keep working on this paper, but refining it like we did the last time it was rejected. It's a pretty decent paper. It's just that it wasn't really something that was going to be in the track at A-Life. They thought it was enough like the other. It's definitely within their scope. But they had a lot of comments about different aspects of the approach. We didn't have any simulations run and incorporated into the paper, so that was an issue too. And so Shab was talking about some of this, and he's interested in working on it more. I mentioned that maybe we can run some simulations and sort of take those and have those in a separate paper, and maybe take some of the ideas from this paper that we submitted to A-Life and sort of, discuss the results of the simulations. And then this other paper that we submitted to A-Life, maybe expand it out a bit more and get it to a point where we can publish it as a sort of an outline of an approach. So we also found out, I think it was this week, that there's this set of special issues that have come out of the Embodied Intelligence Workshop, which is, of course, something we participated in last month, or I think maybe the month before. But anyways, they're following up on that workshop with a series of published papers and a collection of papers in the Artificial Life Journal, which is different, and it's an ebook that they want to put together. So they're going to do this stuff with, I mentioned, I think via email and via Slack, that we might do this. We might take this paper, expand it out, and then submit it to one of those venues. So this is what this conversation was. And then there's this talk that Jesse went to that involved that paper that I think we reviewed it last week.
Well, what it was a Johann John is one of my most respected neuroscience people that I know. He's a really, really smart guy in Boston. He's at Boston University. And he has a discussion group that meets somewhat weekly about like higher level topics and stuff. And this week he invited Paul Sisek, I think is how you say it, Kisek or Sisek. Yeah. And the majority of the meeting was him going over his paper, which I believe Bradley spoke about last week. And it's the one that had all those cool diagrams about evolution. And I don't know if we want to talk about this in depth here or later, but it was a really interesting event to have Paul going over it himself, and then to hear the groups kind of, bouncing off ideas. And then Johan's, he had his own sort of ideas about that are a little bit beyond me about. He tried to talk about a different aspect of neuroanatomical development that might have been slightly kind of related to, but in a different look at that happening in like the human brain, about how different parts of it could more easily connect to each other, basically. But I'm not. I don't have a good explanation for how to talk about that right now. But I would say that it's an amazing talk and it's recorded. And I know Johan has a YouTube channel, but I don't know if it's on there yet or when it will be there. So, but I really recommend it because it's. I may say more about it later, but it really showed these. It's really quite interesting in terms of brain injury vehicles, and if you read the book, Brain Injury Vehicles is kind of about looking at these sort of anatomical developments in nervous systems in a very simple way, and there's a lot of overlap there. So I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Yeah, I'm going to actually revisit this.
Oh, sorry.
I had some thoughts about it.
Can you say that again?
Oh, I have some more things to say about it later.
Okay, yeah.
Like, in the context of vehicles, so... but we can talk about the event a little bit later on, too. But this was really exciting stuff. I didn't get to go to this event, but maybe we'll see the video. So, I don't know if we have anything in this channel, probably not. The CGS group, okay, so in the CGS group then, we submitted 2 abstracts this week to the Cultural Evolution Society. So this is Cultural Evolution now, and we submitted 2 abstracts. One was on this contextual geometric structures work, and so this is something that I'm preparing right now, or we're going to work on. It's due the 14th of May, so it's coming up in 2 weeks, so this is something that needs to be done soon, but I have some slides on this stuff, so it's not that isn't going to be that hard. I don't know about the submission that Jesse made, which was a week later, was yesterday, so I don't know what the deadline is. Probably later for that, but I don't know. if you've heard anything back already. Probably not.
Which one is this again?
This is for the Cultural Evolution Society. So Jesse made a submission on cognition futures, because we can only do one per.
I have not heard anything back from it yet, but it has been submitted. I don't know if you saw the updates, but I slightly tweaked the abstract to. I just added a couple words and tried to adjust some of the phrasing. So it really is mostly like 90 to 95% the same. But I did submit it, and I'll let you know when I hear more.
Oh yeah. Thank you for that. So that was submitted, and it's like a rolling or acceptance. So like people have been submitting for like 2 months, and they accepted so we're gonna be working on these slides here, and so that's gonna be a May project. So that's good, and we'll talk more about that in future meetings. I don't have the slides open today. They're still kind of all over the place, but so let's see. There are 2 replies in this. Okay, so that was all being squared away yesterday. Then we have a bunch of things in cognition futures. This is where we have a couple papers that I think Jesse put in the channel. This one here. Clone structured graph representations enable flexible learning and vicarious evaluation of cognitive maps. So this is about cognitive maps, which are these representations largely in the hippocampus, the way they've been studied anyways. And the maps in the hippocampus have been critical for us in understanding spatial cognition. So like these cognitive maps are things like when you explore an environment, you're encoding, different aspects of the environment. There are these so-called place cells that represent places. There are these so-called grid cells that represent like sort of a grid representation of the environment. So it's like it basically builds a mesh of the environment and allows you to interact relative to different positions. So there are all these different types of the cells that interact, and that's the representation of the cognitive map. The idea of a cognitive map goes back about 40 years. There's a book on it that talk about cognitive maps. They kind of lay out the argument, and so people have been following up on this mostly in the context of spatial cognition, but also in conceptual memory, because the hippocampus is also the seat of memory consolidation. So, but I've heard less about that. So, this is an interesting paper. And then there's this paper, The Radically Embodied Conscious Cybernetic Bayesian Brain, towards explaining the emergence of agency. So this is on enactivism. This is Adam Safran's latest paper. And so this is something that I think we've talked a lot about enactivism here in the group. And it's kind of like it goes on about agency from an enactivist point of view, or maybe a critique of it. Anyways, that's in the Cognition Futures channel. If anything,
I didn't get to read that paper yet, but I'm definitely I'm really curious to see Adam sort of sit with this, a lot of his ideas and stuff. So, that's a definite read. I didn't have a lot of time this week. I had a lot of things to sort out, but I think next week, in the near future, I'd like to maybe present that paper actually. So yeah, I don't know if you had it in a review thing, but I think this one that I'm going to take a deep dive into and stuff on it.
Yeah, that'd be great. I just saw it in there. I didn't know. Yeah, it'd be great because I'm interested, especially with the workshop coming up. The one with the Emergent Interaction workshop, and I've invited Jesse and Daniela into the Slack for that. There's a separate Slack for that event. So I wanted to just let people know that like probably we'll be posting on like the outcome of this workshop, and a lot of it will probably be in the Slack, a lot of the discussions. So hopefully we can get some discussions. People who attend the workshop will ask questions about the paper that we've submitted, and so that'll be good. The cybernetics channel, actually, I think I posted some things in here. Oh yeah, I posted on this thing about loopiness. So this is a thing about, like, I found a bunch of papers yesterday. I don't know how I got into this, but it's about something called loopy belief propagation, and some of it is in networks. I think most of it's in networks, actually. So the idea is that there's this propagation in networks, and you can build a Bayesian model of it, or it can just be like something else. I don't really know. I haven't really dove into this area yet, but I thought it would be an interesting thing to at least put in the Slack and, see if people are interested in it. It's a good marker for like literature review later. So let's see if we can talk a little bit about that. So this is Mark Newman. He's a big name in networks, and this is belief propagation for networks with loops. So this is about like networks that have loops, which are basically like, networks that have there's sort of these complex networks as opposed to trees, which go in one direction. And so the abstract says belief propagation is a widely used message passing method for the solution of probabilistic models and networks. So these are things like epidemic models, and we've heard a lot about those in the past year and a half. Spin models and Bayesian graphical models. So this is something that is a Bayesian graphical model, or these trees maybe with cycles in them or feedbacks that attempt to sort of get at causality. But it suffers from the serious shortcoming that it works poorly in the common case of networks that contain short loops. So this is a performance issue. Here we provide a solution to this long-standing problem, deriving a belief propagation method that allows for fast calculation of probability distributions in systems of short loops, potentially with high density, as well as giving expressions for the entropy and partition function, which are notoriously difficult to compute. And so they kind of go into the technical aspects of it. So yeah, this is just 3 papers on this topic. I don't know if there's anything to follow up on here, but it's in the channel. Then there's this data science. This was something I think from not this week, but the past week. This is some stuff that was presented at the INCF assembly on self-supervised learning. I don't know if there's anything in the Developmental AI channel new. Maybe this one here. Oh, this is the golden mean as clock cycles of brainwaves. This is a paper that Jesse found. This is something about information coding in the brain and how it might be based on the golden mean. So if you're interested in that, that's for you. I mean, it's interesting to me. Let's see, ethics, tech, and society. Usually there's a lot going on there. Actually, we had only a couple things this week. So this is, Jesse posted something about this person's website for technical approaches to ethics, tech, and society. Do you want to mention anything about this, Jesse?
I forget how I came across her work specifically, but I think this is a very good resource to look at in terms of a lot of our work so far, what we presented on, has kind of been, I guess, theoretical and conceptual, and in the future, I wouldn't mind getting at some of these specific implementations. Like we talked a little bit about Sarah Brown and her approach from getting in Krishna's context, inputting stuff into the feedback loop. of the sort of auditing and process of coming to data. But I think her lab is another person in that vein that seems very much worth looking into. So bottom line, yeah, let's look into that. And there's a whole I don't know how many people in the lab right now are going to want to go into that specifically, but I think I know Angela mentioned, look for projects to join. And this is something that we could talk about after the Slack review, but there's sort of there's a lot of things that can be done with the ethics team in general, whether it was more conceptual and theoretical stuff, or people who want to go into specifically some of the coding aspects of it, and other stuff too. Like Aaron's not here today, but Aaron's very much into accessibility and sort of outreach of making certain accessibility in terms of helping people have access to understanding and technical skills and stuff like that. So there's a few things in that area that can be fleshed out into projects that people can sort of pick up and move with. But that's sort of where we're at with that whole team right now. And I want to be doing more with them, but the last week my focus has not been there. So there's plenty of stuff to do. And honestly, I don't think I even really went over that much. In the start of April when I was at Envision and New York Celebration of Women at the same time, we talked about it a little bit, but there's a lot of follow up to be had because people asked questions about the slides and people have reached out about them and wanted to not necessarily collaborate in the sense, but there's been a lot of connections made from those events, and there's quite a bit of stuff to follow up on from that. So as in general, I kind of encourage people to think about ideas they want to do and projects they'd like to build or create, or if they don't, you can either do it in a leadership role or think of an idea and say, oh well, I might not be able to fully do this myself, but I'm looking for others that would want to pursue something on this topic. So that's my little note about that. But as far as a general update for the ethics team, there's a lot of there are some conferences that are upcoming, and I don't know if they're on the submissions sheet or not, but there's excuse me. There's a lot to be done there. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, we should probably talk about something that Anusha might be interested in, in terms of, I know you had mentioned that she was interested in the cognition futures work, but I don't know how we want to introduce her to that. And then Angela, I know she's interested in a number of things, but I want to I want to get some feedback about what maybe specifically. I see her.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Was there a question that I should answer?
Oh, okay. So yeah, I mean, I guess, well, maybe not. It's just I was talking about maybe how to get more specific feedback about what people want to work on for the next, maybe for the summer, or thinking about the things that you're interested in. If something is, it sounds interesting to you. So, I mean, that's usually the way we do things in the group. We usually go through the different projects and we kind of maybe get into the Slack channel and maybe, something sounds interesting to you. Maybe we can follow up on it.
Cool. Well, this is going to sound weird, but my interests are really oddly aligned with Anson's. So if you think, oh, would Anson like this? There's a halfway decent chance I might too.
Okay.
Yeah, I would kind of slot Anson into someone that's in the Cognition Futures. Cognition Futures is sort of the team that I have made outside of the ethics team, but it's like a lot of his work fits with that. And then maybe like,
Let's just.
huh?
I want to work with you.
Yeah. There may also be like, I know you're interested in like the alternative justice stuff too. So I think there might be some strong overlaps with some of the ethics stuff as well, or like finding different ways. Like I would also say like there's a lot of room for like exploration of, especially like technology assisted, but like ways of dealing with justice and law, legislation, and human rights and stuff. Like I think there's a lot there. So just saying, like, there's nothing. I'm sorry.
I'm pretty sure using emerging technologies to help human rights is like very aligned, possibly the most aligned with my interests that I can think of right now.
Exactly. And so that's why I feel like at one point I would really like to have like at some time a meeting with you and maybe Aaron, because I feel like Aaron's doing well right
Aaron
now.
again? Sorry, who's Aaron?
Aaron isn't in the lab today, but she was a contributor to our project on AI ethics. She was a co-creator to the presentation we gave at New York Celebration of Women in Computing on AI ethics.
Yeah, that was canceled though. Oh, you guys did it this year?
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
I'm so out of the loop. Nice.
Yeah, that was this year. And she helped with that, and she's currently doing the finals right now, but I think when she comes back, there's going to be room for a project along the lines of what I just said. And so I feel like at some point it'd be great if we could all meet up and decide kind of a stuff to do, because I think there's something to be done there, and I think there's a lot of energy and ability and passion for that, but it's just sort of not. It's just not like right here in the moment.
Right now. Yeah, it's not being funneled right now. Okay.
Yeah.
So give her my email. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And she's in the Slack periodically, but we'll like an email chain might be best, because I think this is the most effective way for both of all you two and me and anybody else who wants to do that. So I'll set up an email later.
Okay.
And then I'll do a intro for Cognition Futures later, but I don't know if we're gonna like do more Slack stuff or where we're at with that right now.
I'm gonna try to finish up on that. It won't take too much longer though.
Okay.
Also, I wanted to hear from Anusha if she thought that there was anything so far that she heard that was sparked her interest, or
I found that paper. I think the creation of creativity networks with the chimpanzees, like the evolutionary type paper.
Yeah.
That sounds very interesting to me. I'm also really interested in cognitive maps. That sounded very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that I don't have any other papers in. We usually do at the end, towards the end of the meeting. We usually review papers and on different topics. I don't have anything this week on that topic, but yeah, it's something we should talk about more in future meetings. Definitely, we do a lot of work on something called representations in the brain and in simulations, and so that fits into that quite well. But I don't have anything. I don't have anything to follow up on today about that too much. But we should definitely talk about that in Slack or in future meetings. I'll keep that in mind. That you're interested in that area. So, and then the paper on sort of the evolution of creativity. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff in terms of looking at like brain evolution, and we talked about this paper from Paul Cizek, which is not exactly in the same area, but they do deal with like how did the brain evolve and putting that onto something they call a phylogeny. And so, yeah, that's something we can follow up with as well.
Okay.
There's a lot of, when I think of Anusha's interests, I think there's a lot of like stuff regarding developmental processes that come to mind. And the easiest, like, we have like a developmental AI project, which is like basically, kind of trying to understand process of biological development and how it applies to AI agents and stuff. So there's a lot of like, and there's quite a bit of overlap between that and the general cognition futures stuff. And there's a lot of emphasis on, I think there's a big need right now for sort of documenting these different developmental processes, whether they're related to creativity in that paper or in the Kajsek paper, Paul Kajsek, apparently. Like, that's like very much related to just anatomical changes and how the structure of an agent's nervous system basically affects their capabilities or their affordances and stuff like that. So I think both of those, I think there's definite ways where you could, and you kind of, like, we kind of already talked about this a little bit before, but like, I think there's quite a bit of ready work to be done on, hey, I'd like to look at this set or this arena of developmental processes and just sort of create some, scouting and breakdown what is this process, and then kind of lead to maybe how can we incorporate this into some of our, either a general map of cognition futures related things, or in an AI sense, doing some of the prep work that it can be eventually put into, a model in the developmental AI sense. So I think there's a lot. And then obviously that's kind of why I encourage you to come check it out. But there's a lot of things to do there. So.
Could I add one more interest? So another interest I have is just like in general, like learning and how that occurs, like from like a psychological perspective. So in particular, I really like language, and I like to study how children acquire language. So pretty much how like, people can learn anything is like really interesting to me.
Me too. Oh my god. The critical language period is so fascinating.
Yes, I really like that. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a whole discussion area. It's not that active right now, but there's a big stuff in like critical periods. Like, that's one of the main parts of developmental AI. So like that whole, there's a lot of stuff to be done in critical periods, and
we have I don't have it up right now, but we have a Discord server on that topic. So we have a bunch of different papers, and it's not been active for the last couple of months, but we're trying to revive it. And then sometimes these things fall dead, and then we have to revive it, and sometimes it's just because people are working on it and then they stop working on it for a while. But I definitely like to get that back going again. And we have that continual embodied learning paper, which is the one we submitted to A-Life. And then that of course needs to be revised. So I think Angela mentioned in the Slack that she was interested in contributing to some of that work. And she was looking at the sheet of submissions. So that's something we can revisit in the next couple weeks. Because we do talk about like critical periods and agents and all this. So it definitely would be in that area. So yeah, we'll talk more about that. I'm glad we're getting some feedback on what sounds interesting to people.
I'm very happy to start working on, to take a look at it at least right now.
Okay.
Because I haven't looked at it. I closely looked at the deadlines. But yeah, and after that, I think I can jump on the Cognition's Futures. I'll also be working on a few personal projects, but I'm pretty sure I can like this.
Yeah.
I can do it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we'll follow up on that. So I had a question for Jesse, something you mentioned a while back. So this was the process review.
Sorry, can you say that again? Because I just lost what you were saying.
Oh, okay. You mentioned something about a process review.
Hold on.
Okay. He's got to come back in. Okay. Yeah, I guess I can just wait for him. Actually, let me share my screen again. And we'll go back to the Slack, but I do want to ask him that question. Okay. So, are you back or?
Yeah, sorry. I don't know why my Just the app isn't working, so I'm using the web app.
Okay.
And it's like very not consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just heard you say, I'm about to ask Jesse a question, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, so you mentioned something about a process review. We were talking about developmental processes and evolutionary processes. What were you thinking about that? Like, what was the thing you had in mind?
Process review?
Yeah.
I don't know
Oh.
what that means.
Well, yeah, it's just something I picked out of the conversation, but it was like, I guess maybe reviewing different developmental processes or biological processes or psychological processes. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't think it was anything, like, I don't have like a big project about it right now, but I think that's kind of one of the aims of, like, it's sort of, a lot of the theme of cognition features is mapping these, like, mapping and sort of categorizing or creating a taxonomy or whatever of like developmental of things related to cognition in general. And it was just sort of a crossover of that. Like, well, in a developmental sense, like, it'd be great to kind of just, have. It'd be nice to have like a tech, maybe a publication of some form, but like just a technical document or a database that just kind of goes over these developmental processes and says, oh, here's what they are, and here's how they might affect things, or potentially eventually put it into like a computational model sense. But like having theory or finding what they are in a cognitive or developmental sense, like whether it's biology or like cognitive science or psychology, just kind of think, okay, here's what this conceptually is in the developmental aspect of learning or growth or whatever affecting cognitive abilities, and just I think some more documentation about that would be helpful for the different aims that we have.
Yeah, I think that would be good. And then, of course, from a sort of an epistemological perspective, how do you define these processes? Because, sometimes they're in the literature and people make a sort of an attempt to characterize something. One of the things, I think we talked a couple weeks ago about interval learning, or interval timing. So there's this phenomenon called interval timing, basically how an organism figures out what, the timing of things in the environment. So it's like, if there's something that happens every day or every week versus like maybe every 15 minutes, or how do you coordinate your movement, then, people have characterized this sort of thing as interval timing. But, it's like maybe a small area where people have written reviews on the topic, but that doesn't mean that that's like this thing that's well characterized in the brain. I mean, some processes like spatial cognition are pretty well characterized, and we still don't know, what's, all involved in spatial cognition. We just know that it's very well studied. But there are other things in the brain that, people have given names to that maybe aren't as clear as to what they are. Maybe there's overlap with other things, like interval timing might have overlap with circadian rhythms or with, movement control, motor control. So those things, and of course they may all be connected. So, I mean, I think about, when you mention that, my mind kind of goes to this idea of like, it's a census, sure, but it's also like there's this map that you can build of the different processes and how they're interrelated, or
yeah. Yeah, like absolutely, and that's the first time I ever worked in a neuroscience lab was actually on circadian rhythm, and when did it start showing effect on the development on a mouse? Like what age in this development did circadian rhythm start showing influence? Was it always there? Was it harder to say? Like, and that was really related to the concept of like, you know, many of the developmental parts of the brain and other organs like maybe aren't fully set up yet. So is it that the influence is there, but it just isn't? There's sort of no, metaphorically speaking, there's no receptor to the signal of the circadian influence, or is it just always present and like is it an adaptation to circadian rhythm or light exposure or whatever, or is it more like, you know, it's kind of like which this isn't exactly what that research was about, but like it comes to my mind like is it an environmental cue that is waiting for developmental capacities to align with, or is it, you know, something that's sort of built in at a deeper level? Like at what level does the external influence or the environment loop in with the developmental process internally as the organism is maturing and able to, you know, as it's maturing. So that was like my first neuroscience experiment, and I think that would be an amazing sort of theme or lens to look at developmental processes, because it's like, and this actually goes with the Kaisi paper, because like I loved the way he was able to like create this big, it was just like a big macro level overview about, you know, when we split off from, I don't know the term, I'm not versed in my biology, but like when we split from this part of the tree of life with this development, the most obvious one is like when it went from one, you know, there was like, you know, it was originally like a single cell, and then it became a long tube, and then tube kind of became like a spinal cord, and then the eye split, you know, and from one view to that, and all these different anatomical processes. And I really like he really went into like, yeah, like these create different affordances, different ways to interact with the environment, and so I feel like that's a really there's a lot of different ways to look at how the agent and its changes, either in an anatomical sense, are related to these different behaviors and options and functionalities, and you know, depending on which level of complexity, I guess, in the organism.
Right.
There's a lot there.
Yeah. I think Angela was going to say something, or she like turned on her camera and.
I don't think so. If so, I forgot already. So.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to go back to the Slack. I'm going to finish that up. And so thanks for the conversation. This is very good. So this is the Ethics Tech Society and Tech channel. There are a couple papers in here that were posted. Aaron posted a paper. So there's a lot of that. Actually, this is interesting. This Lisa Feldman Barrett tweet about where they write the words affect substitute emotion. The article equates two words because they have a muddled history. So this is kind of like where you have this idea of like processes that people refer to, but you know, maybe it's even like meaning of words thing. Like people use, like there's a history in neuroscience, you know, like people study something and there's like a history of referring to this thing that isn't linked to mechanisms in the brain. And so there's a lot of stuff that gets inherited, and there's sometimes a lot of bias in some of the terms that people use to describe things that are behaviors. So that's something to think about. Let's see. Go to general channel. So this was just, I think, a lot of stuff, more stuff from the Paul Slisek talk. This is the Johann John's perspective on this. And then Jesse says that this talk was vindication of a lot of the Bratenberg vehicle stuff, a lot of the stuff, the themes in the lab. So I think we talked about that a little bit. Yeah, this looks really interesting.
Yeah, I'll go over. Can you still? Yeah, you can still hear me, right?
What was that?
You can.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
I'll go over. I don't know what else we wanted today, but I'll go. I took some notes on the talk, and I'll go over that a little bit after this.
All right.
But I don't know.
Yeah.
What else you want to do today in that sense?
All right. I think I just want to do one more channel here, and that is that there's some new things in the virtual reality neurotech channel. Yeah, so check that out. So yeah, I think we're done with the Slack. Why don't we go to Jesse for a short update, which will probably involve the going over this talk. So.
All right, I'm gonna try to share my screen on this device, and I'm gonna guess it's not gonna work. So there's a good chance that I come out and come back in. So let's see how this goes. If I can do this. Can I even share my screen here? I may not be able to on this. Hold on. I'll be right back.
Okay. Yeah. So while Jesse comes back in, are there any questions that anyone has so far? There we go. Okay. There we go. Here's the other screen, I guess.
So, I don't know if it's gonna work that great.
Okay.
Let's see. Can you see my screen?
No. Cannot.
What's the best email for you, or file you have?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I should have just sent that to you, apparently.
Okay. Here we go. I got it. So this is background on Paul Cizik. Okay, all right. So this is the doc that you made for the. Okay.
Right. It's just a Google document.
All right.
And I don't see it myself.
Oh, I'll share my screen. I haven't shared it yet. All right. So this is the document.
Yeah. Yeah. So this basically Kaisek is. I think he's making a book on this, and his latest paper is about this stuff. And they went to his website, and this is basically how how he introduces the project on his website, and it's basically about evolution and that kind of stuff. And these slides aren't going to be that great because I only got some of them in here. There's a bunch that are scattered. I didn't know what the talk was going to be about specifically. So I started kind of documenting it in Slack like I used to do it, and I was like, oh, there's just so much stuff here that I decided to throw it all into this document. And I don't know, given my current situation, I would normally be like kind of flipping back between stuff in a more articulate manner right now, between Slack and the post there and here. But in the moment, can you scroll up again? Let me see.
This one?
Yeah.
Right.
You see it, but that's okay. I think it's because I'm on my phone. I can't see it, but don't worry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you have to. I don't know if it's like switching to me or not, but you have to like pin Bradley's thing and then zoom in, and just the app is a little bit strange on the phone sometimes.
Yeah.
But basically, it's the slides. You can also look in the general channel and look at the slides if you want. But whoops, this is like all funny for me too. Basically, it's just an image of the different branches in the tree of life, kind of thing. Like, and he's showing these different breakpoints. And I don't quite know. Actually, I will pull it up on my own end here. Just a moment. I'm trying to think of any specific highlights. It might not be the easiest way to go about this. If you go down to the jaw, the next slide,
Yeah,
and
jaw
there's a little bit
vertebrates.
of writing underneath it. There should be some writing underneath it as well.
Oh, yeah, this here.
Let's see. I think the bony fish one is also where he starts talking about the separation of eyes, and really interesting stuff about how when the dinosaurs came into it. I'm at the next slide now. Sauropsis.
Bony fishes?
The next one.
Okay. Yeah, tetrapods.
And then the next one after that.
Sauropods, yeah.
Yeah. There was an interesting thing about. I think you scroll down a little bit more too. I think there's another one that's just like it next.
Okay, this one, yeah.
Oh, it's kind of, yeah. It's caught between some of the things, but you can see it says affordances somewhere on there. Just the way that they brought affordances into evolution and how at different parts of the it was a really interesting way to kind of it was a really interesting way to kind of come into this discussion about like it wasn't specifically named, like it's so many information wasn't specifically named, and direct perception wasn't specifically named. But it was really interesting to get to places in like to have affordances come up and to have them come up in a way where these evolutionary changes were sort of tailored towards. He didn't say it specifically, but just in my mind, like tailored towards maximizing the perception of relevant affordances to different animals. And there was big changes, obviously, as the shape changed from original, like really undeveloped organisms in the ocean, and then they have more structure and more fish-like, and then coming onto land was a totally different set of affordances, and it reminded very much of great river vehicles because in land, or prior to being in the land, your sense of vision was not really that distant oriented. Like it was pretty proxemic, and olfactory and senses and smells were much. That was maybe more salient in some ways because of the way you could interpret information around you, and it's the transition from that into land and into how to navigate land. There were changes in what kind of information was prioritized, and this, I think he put this picture of the lizard here as a sense of showing like talking specifically about affordances, like it's not like this small lizard has a gigantic generative worldview of all possible surfaces in the area, like miles and miles around it, and then it notices, oh well, in this category there's a hole for me to hide in. It's much more, hey, here's a space I can potentially hide my body in. So he's kind of introducing the concept of ethics and direct perception in this way. Okay. And it led to an interesting discussion later on about, like there were papers, I don't know if I mentioned them in the notes below or whatever, But at some point, it kind of is a little bit further down. Yeah. Like there's the mammal slide where it kind of gets more like cognitive maps of actual spaces and integration of different things. A lot of biological stuff. Yeah, and then this is one of his like new slides that he put together, and there's a lot of talk about action maps, Graziano, and sort of expanding on affordances. Kaisek commented a lot about Pezzulo and extending hierarchical levels like of affordances and sub goals, and how that affected a lot of things. Or like his work on trying to expand. Like so, you have like this is kind of a deep in the weeds conversation for people. Like this is I kind of wish Anderson was here for this, but like there was a deep in the weeds like. In terms of cognition, there's kind of a spectrum of like radical embodied cognition, which is super direct perception oriented, and there's no representation. There's not a lot of like this big mapping and super complicated concepts, and you know there's not a big world view, and it's not a big. It's very much the opposite of everything is highly computational and highly representative and highly symbolic. And highly, categorized in the brain, like direct perception and radical embodied cognition is kind of at the far one side of the spectrum where it's like very minimal involvement in the representation sense, and what's kind of interesting and relevant both to the lab's work and one of my first ever like proposals for stuff in the lab was talking how do we toggle different levels of cognitive abilities in an agent, and how like what does that manifest? And in one sense, it's this graph, this chart that Kaisek put together is sort of the actual history of life along those lines, in that these different levels of complexity kind of transcend or show the different paths that have been taken. And it's not a complete map, obviously. There's like some minute changes, but he's trying to focus some of the major architectural, anatomical architectural changes that led to some changes in affordances, led to changes in like what was able to be processed and how. So that's kind of one of the takes on it, and another is sort of like I haven't looked at Pezzulo's work extensively, but I've heard of him a lot, and how he kind of builds upon affordances and what are sort of these like different ways of thinking about them in a more expanded version than maybe just straight up direct perception. Like there has to be something a little bit more than that. Such to do some of the things that mammals do. Like you can't so social learning and the linguistics component and how they even relates to like this ties. It might be the most direct connection, but like this to me ties really much into the critical period about language acquisition. Like there's sort of important environmental stuff that needs to be engaged in order to it's like metaphor, in order to have the capacity that by which you can explore certain forces. And if you don't have that engagement at the time, in a biological sense and in a developmental sense, you won't be able to really do certain things. So, and that's a bit of a rushed and sloppy overview, but that's a lot of what came up here, what came up there, and there's other slides, but I don't know. I think that's kind of towards the conclusion slide. Yeah. The talk had a lot of there were a lot of good citations on the sidebars, so those are all things to look into. that's Johann's like deep neuroscience talk, which I won't talk about here. But he was basically talking about the structure of the cortex and how that evolved, or like might have some implications for evolution or even like phenotypical development, I think. So
Yeah.
that's all I'll say about that stuff.
Yeah. This looks really interesting too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the Florida Geo one? He's basically adjusting, like saying.
Oh,
He's
about
basically, yeah. Johann, I really like Johann's very good arguments against a lot of simplification of theories to make stuff more convenient. And he's very much like, well, sometimes it's just not that simple. And you know, I think like he's very critical of the basic uniformity, and it's like, well, there's a lot of, you know, across different theories and different domains. I find Johann's to be having very good critiques of basically overexpansion of some theories, and open and sincere openness to find, okay, where does this model of theory end, and where does it begin? So
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, this is great stuff. I actually gave a talk about this sort of thing a long time ago. We had like a discussion group in the neuroscience program where I was a graduate student, and I gave a talk on like brain evolution and cognition. So a lot of this stuff is pretty familiar. So you're referring to these points. These are sort of like the idea that these things that are mentioned in these little dashes on the tree, that's basically when people hypothesize that they evolved. And we hypothesize that because you have this common ancestry. So like if I have a tree here with different branches, they come together somewhere back in the past. If these two taxa, say, share this trait, then we can reasonably say that it evolved somewhere in this common ancestral branch here. But we don't really know that. So we're just kind of putting things on the tree. I mean, there is some evidence of this in the fossil record, but, you know, it's hard to get fossils of the brain. There are things called endocasts, which are basically preserve the outside surface of the brain, but not necessarily the soft structures inside. You can also infer this from genetic data, but it's still, again, you know, for structures, it's a bit hard to do. So, you know, this is the sort of this approach where you have this tree, and then you're putting these traits on the tree. You're just kind of inferring where they should go. And the value of an approach like this is that you have this tree. Here's a better version of it. You have this tree, and you have common ancestry here, and maybe if these taxa all share something, it should have evolved back here. You can see with respect to the this tree of animals where this thing came online. So, you know, you can see, for example, the cerebellum evolved here, but maybe things like the neural crest and the neural tube evolved further back. You can see how these components started to add, you know, the brain basically added some complexity in different places along different, the evolution of different, what they call clades or groups of organisms. And so, you know, there are things that are going to be evolving in mammals or in primates that are unique to primates or mammals, but that doesn't mean that, like, say, birds haven't evolved their own set of traits, and that, you know, there are things that are shared between birds and mammals and so on. So this is a interesting approach. You know, a lot of neuroscientists don't think about evolution that much, you know, except in maybe a very general sense. But this is I think this is a good tool to sort of figure out where these things sort of originated. So, thank you, Jesse. That was a very good summary of that. And I think we should talk more about that. Speaking of which, I might as well just get into this thing here. I'm gonna get into I have something prepared here. Let me share my screen again. All right, we're back. Okay, so this is some stuff I was working on with the embodied continual learning. This is like last several weeks I've been thinking more about this. And let's see. So the first thing I want to talk about is this sort of this timeline that I've created. So this is based around like two. Well, actually, maybe this is the one. Okay. So don't necessarily pay much attention to these quotes. This is just for presentation's sake, but focus instead on these two timelines. So the first timeline is sort of labeled with different things on it, and basically this is an idea that we think about cognition, maybe like in this part of the timeline here. This is a log scale timeline, so what I'm trying to do is think about behavior in milliseconds, but on the order of maybe 10 to the 12th milliseconds. So it's like when we think of cognition, we think of stuff down at this end, which is like maybe 1,000 milliseconds. So like the typical psychology experiment, you would run a trial and you present someone with a stimulus and they'd give a response. And all that happens within about 500 to 1,000 milliseconds. And the response is actually quicker than that. And then, of course, neuronal activity and fast recognition of things occurs even more quickly than that. But we're always thinking in this time scale here. And so when we read papers on neuroscience and we read papers on psychology, that's typically the time scale we're engaging with. However, there are longer time scales. There's a sort of naturalistic time scale, which is, maybe 15 minutes, which I put on here as short coffee break, which could be a lot of things in substitution of that. It could be like prey capture. Well, that wouldn't even be that long. But the idea is that you have these naturalistic behaviors that happen in about 15-minute intervals. So I put short coffee break. You could have like a short conversation. You could have something like, I don't know, I'm just thinking of things that happen in 15-minute intervals. But I think the point is that there's a lot of stuff that happens like a little bit longer than your typical psychology experiment. Advertisements are 30 seconds long, like a standard 30-minute television program, or, something like that where you're interacting with the stimulus and you're kind of thinking and you have these thoughts and you're doing these things, these actions during it. And it's, all that's being integrated. Then we have short-term memory consolidation at about 2 hours, so this is where you have short-term memories and they kind of get consolidated over that period of time. You might think about things for about 2 hours. There are things that happen in a 2-hour interval that we don't think about in terms of psychology experiments. Again, this is something, it's more of a naturalistic. So an ethologist might have a lot to say about these things in animals, observing things in, different types of interactions and dominance displays and things like that could go on that long. Then you have the 1 day mark, which is 10 to the 10th milliseconds, which is long-term memory consolidation. And that it has to do with, like taking the short-term memories and converting them into long-term memories. So long-term memory consolidation usually involves some sort of sleep period. So if you go to sleep and you wake up the next day, that's supposed to help with long-term memory consolidation. And, this is just an arbitrary thing I've put on this timeline, but I think this, thinking about cognition out over the course of a day is important because, you do things like maybe in a 15-minute interval or a 2-hour interval, and then you come back the next day and you can recall certain aspects of it, and maybe you can't recall other aspects of it. And so that's another part of cognition. Then, of course, because this is a log scale, 10 to the 12th is a much longer period of time. It's 31 years. And so over 31 years, you start to get historical events. And you start to get things like the transmission of information across generations, and even like epigenetic memory or epigenetic transmission of traits. We know that there are some traits that can be transmitted maybe a couple generations epigenetically. You don't really see evolution at this time scale, but you're going in that direction. And so there are a lot of things about maybe like historical memory or cultural artifacts that are important at this scale start to become important at this scale, whereas they're sort of separate from what's going on in individual brains, but nevertheless they play a role in cognition. So this is a quote from Herbert Simon up here. Everything interesting in cognition acts above the 100 millisecond level. And so this is the 100 millisecond level here in gray, and everything else I've mentioned is out in this period. And so according to Herbert Simon, that would be everything that's interesting. But we don't really study it that much in let's say, like cognitive science. We're interested in this maybe 1,000 millisecond interval, which is like, there's stuff that's interesting, but when we think about a cognitive agent, we need to think much longer term, especially if we're doing things like evolving agents, where we're, evolving a bunch of agents and we're modeling like evolution, like what we've done with some of the Bradenberg vehicles in the group. So, and I've put these red lines here in the bottom figure as sort of an idea of what we're looking at here. So, this red line here says a single stimulus presentation. As I mentioned, it's out to about 1,000 milliseconds. Brain networks and circuit function occur at a longer period, so a little bit over the 15-minute mark. You get circuits that sort of work, there's a lot of information circulating through the circuit. There are these brain networks that are functional and that consolidate over that time. They're a little bit later, maybe 2 to maybe several hours, there's naturalistic exploration of the environment. You might go out for a drive, you might interact with some people at a coffee break. Those things, might take from 15 minutes to maybe 2 hours or more. Our meeting is like naturalistic exploration of environment. You're exploring all these different topics, and what will you remember in a week? Maybe not as much as you would like, and so that's the kind of thing I'm talking about there. I put this in to be sort of provocative. Training time for a deep learning network. And that's out here maybe within a day, but it could be longer. The point of putting this in is to show that, we're doing this sort of, high class AI, but it's taking a certain amount of time to learn things that maybe we learn in a lot shorter period of time with natural brains. And then finally, this red line, lifespans. So 31 years, of course, is not a human lifespan, but it's on that order. So in a lot of organisms, they live 31 years, maybe less. But the idea is that when you get up to this point, 10 to the 12th milliseconds, you're actually going to multiple lifespans or multiple generations of organism. So I put this quote from Benoit Mandelbrot in here. As you come closer to a cloud, you don't get something smooth, but irregularities at a smaller scale. And this is a quote about fractals, of course, which is to say that when you look at something, it looks very smooth, like a coastline. When you zoom in at a smaller spatial scale, you start to see, irregularities. And, if you measure a coastline, it depends on what scale you're at. Because if you're at a very, broad spatial scale, you can measure a coastline, and it gives you a certain answer. But if you zoom into maybe like a different part of, very close shot of that coastline, it's a lot longer because you're measuring a lot of irregularities. And so your perspective in that matters. And so that's kind of what we get with this. So that's... Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you had a comment about, like...
I was going to make a slightly silly comment that it reminds me of a saying from an esteemed philosopher, which is actually like a 90s song that goes, "Everything looks perfect from far away."
Yeah.
And it's about how the coastline and clouds seem really smooth, but
yeah,
everything looks perfect from far away. But they're not always that way actually up close.
Yeah. Yeah, and so this is the other thing I wanted to show, and this is a developmental aspect. So this is something I've been working out. I think I mentioned in the Slack about the Cizek paper. There was a tweet about it earlier this month, and I mentioned something about modeling it as a sort of a differentiation tree or a developmental tree.
Mm.
And so in nature you see, or in animals you see two different types of sort of embryo with germ layer. So like embryos start off as a mass of cells, and then they quickly form these germ layers. Yeah. So
I'm remembering. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, okay. So the idea is that you have some organisms have 2 layers of germ, some have 3 layers of germ. And what this means is that you have these different types of tissue that form initially. And then these different types of tissue are going to go on to form more differentiated types of cells in the organism. So the endoderm and the ectoderm form different types of cells. And then you get the endoderm, ectoderm, and then mesoderm, which is in the middle between the endoderm and the ectoderm, and triploblasts. And as you can see in the evolutionary tree here, this idea of diploblastic development is, I guess you could call it the basal condition, which means that it was the early organisms that diverged earlier that have this sort of pattern. And then later you get this triploblastic pattern where you have 3 germ layers. And this is largely due to things like muscle and neurons and things that are forming, and things that maybe have more specialization in, say, like mammals than they do in marine invertebrates, which is where you often see this diploblastic configuration. And so the point of this is to say that when we talk about development, there is this aspect of like cells like sort of come up, you have this fertilized egg, and then it produces a bunch of clones that are multipotent, and then you have this sort of sorting mechanism, if you want to talk about it that way, that says basically cells join this sort of tissue, right? They become a certain type of tissue, and then they differentiate into certain types of cells. So, for example, you might have endoderm that forms an endodermic layer, and then those cells become certain types of cells. It sort of restricts their fate as to what they can become, but it also sets up sort of anatomically what things are going to sort of differentiate. And so having this third germ layer just allows you to have more, allows you to have more specialization, especially in the developmental model. But down here, I've actually shown that you can model a Bradenberg vehicle not in terms of like the sensors and effectors and the neurons and that, but you can actually model this as a instance of triploblastic development. So here we have, and this is just ignoring what happens biologically. You have this triploblastic model. So you have 3 different germ layers, and we're not going to say, because it's made up, they don't map to endoderm and ectoderm and so forth. They map to these different things. And so you get this change in shape, and you get this change, so you have, for example, the sensor effector layer, which is in black, and it starts out as a little ball in the middle, and then it migrates to the edges. So you get these sensors and effectors. So in a model like this, we can configure these vehicles in any way we want. And in fact, I'm just thinking about this. It'd be interesting to see if we could evolve, like using a genetic algorithm, different configurations of vehicle, which were, you would have this layer, which is sensor effector layer, which would then migrate and break apart and migrate to the edges of the embryo, and then form these sensors and effectors in different locations. And then you have the other 2 germ layers as well as the neural network. So this is kind of like the layer that gives rise to neurons. You have a layer, but then it constrains where that is located in the agent. And then the vehicle body, which in a lot of the stuff that we've done so far, the vehicle bodies remain constant. But in this case, you have a vehicle body forming maybe along the outer edge, which it's sort of in the outer edge anyways in this diagram, or, with different sort of configurations. So you can actually stretch it out or squish it, or, stretch it in different ways, like maybe as a star. So you can, configure all sorts of networks of body shape this way. You can, shape the body any way you want it. the sensors and effectors move around the body. And this is sort of what you see in development. If you connect, say, like something like a genetic algorithm to this, it really allows you to, say, evolve different strategies for morphogenesis, and then eventually into, building a nervous system where things are being learned. So that's all I had to say about that. I didn't know if we had any comments on that.
I wish I could have full access to the slides from the top, because there was some stuff that I would really like to add to it. I think that's really interesting, because when he was talking about, I don't know the right words for them right now, but like anablast and
Yeah.
bypass.
Yeah, it's just the number of germ layers that you have. So, like, I think in the tree that Cizek made, he talks about, he labels those in the phylogeny. Basically, it's like, when did these evolve? The 2 germ layers evolve pretty early, we know that. But then the 3rd germ layer evolves later, and he doesn't show it on the tree, I don't think, but that's, it's part of, like, the way he builds his tree, because he builds it out from, like, a single, from a very simple brain to something that has a lot of different anatomical regions. And so he kind of labels the tree in that way. But he also puts the germ layers on there.
I wish I could have had, either when the recording comes out, or just I couldn't. I tried to find my screenshots just now, but they weren't. All of the original stuff. The first, some of the most interesting stuff for the lab would be actually the first part of it, where he's talking just about the simplest possible organisms and how they're very undifferentiated, but they were essentially using like Levy walks, and how dopamine and serotonin played a role in that, in the sense of like dopamine as this very early component to adjust when you're going to take a longer leap. I don't know how to explain Levy walks very well, because I just learned about them then. It's essentially like a way of just exploring an unknown space, like very, very simple. Turn left, turn right, move around, one step back, one step forward, and then eventually you take a much longer step, or a much further movement, in how he was talking about it. And he was basically saying how dopamine played a role. Like, once you extend the dopamine of exploiting this immediate area around you, like, okay, well, this is boring now, or I'm not getting any resources or whatever, you take this longer leap in a different direction. This is like super, very simple organisms at this level, and he's kind of explaining that. And there's a discussion about, serotonin and dopamine and how they react to this time. So that was really cool. And then what I think I was able to find, I'm going to really quickly try to join on my phone again and share this. I don't know if it's going to work. But let's see. Yes.
All right, got it.
Can you see this?
Yes.
I think so. So, this was a really interesting diagram that he drew about kind of that process of foraging and fleeing. And this actually isn't. There was a better one that was before this, but it kind of like these. He was explaining, and there was a really good talk. And this wasn't the main theme of his talk, but he talked about it mostly at the start, and it was a theme throughout, like how these different things affect the feedback loop. And like, okay, explore, and then like escape as something to move it. This is in the Slack. This is one of the first slide captures that I got, and when Johan's recording comes out, it'll be there. But I thought it was. I'm trying to center this here for you. I thought it was a really interesting way to look at these very simple drives, and this is why I was mentioning, like, oh man, I wish Anson was here. This is like super related to allostatic drives and the different like priorities or weights that are put on maybe exploring, or like how dopamine is processed in a certain way, or what's gonna incentivize this, that, or the other thing in terms of what level of what state you are in and how that affects your movement and behavior and your transitioning to different. In this case, environments, but in other animals, could be different behavioral states or behavioral reward, differentiation, processing, and so on.
Yeah, I think
So
that's.
I wish I had a little bit more of the initial stuff, because I just got super excited to see all this stuff and the way it was broken down in the context of like fundamental aspects and drivers to light, and then how if you put like this is like in one sense in my toggling layers of whatever, this is kind of like the base, like this is sort of where a lot of things start from, and then you keep building and building and building, adding onto this with the layers of complexity of the organisms, its anatomical structures. Then you get to human level, you have there's versions of this that extend to these things that aren't really environment and aren't anatomical structures. You have these sort of cultural, things that deeply affect learning. And this is where I would tag, I can't remember his name, I think it was Michael M. something, but I mentioned this podcast, the Many Minds podcast, and it was this sort of this engineer who eventually went into like sociology, and he's put a lot of things towards the like cultural development in this lens too. I think it's quite interesting. So I'll leave it at that. But
Okay.
there's a lot of super interesting stuff at the start of the Kaisek talk that we should look at later when it's available.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that's great. So I don't know if Anusha or Angela had any comments at this point.
Could you tell us more about historical memory? I thought that was really interesting.
Oh, well, I mean, the point was that you have like learning and memory as we think about it in terms of memory consolidation. For example, if I present something to you, like a book, and I ask you to memorize it and recite it to me, that's typically the way we do it in school or like, in an experiment, and you evaluate it. Historical memory is more like, like oral traditions or things that maybe people write in books, and like the way you integrate it. So say about the Civil War, but you don't really know, you weren't there and you didn't really observe it. You get your information from books, which are then gotten from like someone's interpretation, and you can sort of converge on things that way. But it's definitely different from the kind of memory that we sort of as firsthand observers have. And so, yeah, that's what I mean by that. And people actually talk about that a lot in anthropology, for example. They talk about it as a way to sort of think about oral traditions or think about how people are, consuming history about things. So, but it's definitely, if you don't observe it as a first-hand observer, that's what you have as your memory, right? You get what's handed down to you. So that's what I mean by that. I think, it's definitely an interesting thing to think about, especially with respect to like cognition, right? Like we don't think about those as a contained unit. That like, okay, what I do here in, maybe 100 milliseconds or 1,000 milliseconds eventually affects what's going to happen in like 100 years. Very indirectly, but
So, like, is that what I think, like on the slide, I think you mentioned like transfer of culture and traits from generations. Like, is that what you meant? Like, you're getting information from people that were there when you weren't there?
Yeah, I mean,
like, is there any other way that transfer happens?
Well, I mean, there's like history, so we transfer knowledge from one generation to the next, and that's how we don't have to learn everything new, anew again. Like, and we can transmit, say, historical events. We can also have practices, and we talked last week about some papers where they talk about how historical practices are passed on, not just in humans, but like in primate species where they wash potatoes. And I think that's something that is somewhat controversial, but they're practices that are passed down, maybe through observation, but also like to young individuals who need to learn things about, how to do things, or, how to think about things. So it's not like you don't start with people talk about the blank slate in terms of like, an individual's cognition, whether we have this innateness or not. But it's actually, there's more a question of the blank slate across generations, whether like every generation starts from nothing, or whether we pass down certain traits, certain practices, certain ideas from generation to generation. You have something up, Jesse?
Oh yeah, this is the podcast that I mentioned, Mutha Krishna, Michael Mutha Krishna. This is like super relevant to what we were just talking about, he's done a lot of interesting studies and discussed it in the podcast, and it tends to be about like even like what you're being trained from. Like there was something about how I forgot the terms. He used specific terms for it, but like how like the social connectivity in groups is super important for keeping high level skills around long term, because there's sort of an intellectual drift that happens if you don't have connectivity, and how when people are trying to learn something, they'll go to who they perceive the best teacher might be in some ways, or the most skilled person may be, but they may not be the best teacher. And it's like how if you have enough connectivity and enough exposure and access, it's kind of like social capital, basically, is the concept. He doesn't say that word, but like, if you're around and exposed enough in a cultural sense to the right information, you can actually get to you can maintain higher levels of understanding through the ecosystem of it. And this is one, like this whole podcast is full of these really interesting insights into culture, innovation, and the collective brain. Like I think it's a great, it's a bit of a tangent to the talk we just had, but like if you're interested in that, this podcast and Mutha Krishna's work is really interesting. And I think as a nod to Anson and a nod to Angela, I've recommended this podcast as much as I possibly can to Anson, and I would say this is also relevant to a lot of the shared interests of like higher level, cultural, broader stuff, but like it's at the level of cultural or historical learning. Like there's a lot of good stuff to look at in this podcast, but also in Mutha Krishna's work in general. So.
Anyone else had anything they wanted to say, or? Okay. I wanted to move on a little bit. I wanted to actually go to the submissions document.
Okay.
And then,
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. One thing I would say, just to kind of give Anusha a prep about this, I don't know if you wanted to. We don't have that much time, so I mean, we don't have time today. But like, if you wanted to talk anything about the papers of like the How Hard is Cognitive Science paper, which we talked a little bit about before, or the other one, we could do that a little bit. But we could also do that some other time. I just realized that. Just like that. Also, like, I meant to say this earlier, but if anybody had to go sooner, you can. Like, you don't have to stay the whole time necessarily. So it's not everybody wants to talk about this stuff as much. But so don't feel the need to do anything. But we should definitely cover submissions, and I don't know if Anusha feels like talking about any of the papers that we discussed this week or not, but it's an option.
Okay. Let me do the submissions, because I know like Angela had expressed interest in what some of the things that were going on, so I did want to get like kind of what was that?
The deadlines that rule our lives.
Yeah, there are a lot of so the idea here is that we're submitting a lot of things and we're keeping track of the deadlines, and that's just a fact of life with academic stuff, is that deadlines happen, and if you miss them, that's actually also a normal part of life, but you got to get in the habit of making them. So
My first enemy.
Yeah. So we have, like, in green are the things that have been accepted, and sometimes already completed.
Speaking of accepted, I got the email that the abstract for Cognition Future stuff was accepted earlier, just a little bit ago. So,
all right, good. Congratulations. So that was, yeah. So a lot of this stuff, yeah. So the green is what's been accepted. So we can actually make this one here green, which is this Cultural Evolution Society submissions. So there are 2 submissions in there. They're both accepted. This is the CGS stuff and the Cognition Future stuff. So now the question is like, we have to create a talk for this. So I think it's like a 12-minute talk.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know what they gave you as a deadline for submitting it.
Now you've been accepted. A 12-minute video of your presentation and a PDF with the slides. We plan to release the virtual conference website on June 2nd. It doesn't seem to give a date. Oh, okay. And as virtual, you are invited to prepare the following materials and upload them to the conference website by May 14th, Friday, 2021. So
okay,
a couple weeks, 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's. I mean, so that means we're gonna have to work on that.
It does mean we're gonna have to work on that. That's fair. Yes.
But that's the fun of this. So
Yes, it is.
so that's our deliverables for that. I just marked it off. We have a lot of things in here that are kind of like outstanding. So let me go to that. It's at the bottom. So I think Angela asked about the Gibsonian information and the continual embodied learning. And so those were rejected from, so artificial life was where we submitted the continual embodied learning, and the CogSci conference is where we submitted the Gibsonian information, and they were both rejected. They're pretty competitive venues, so I'm not worried about that too much. But we're going to recycle those, and so there are a number of options here for submitting this. I don't know exactly where the Gibsonian information paper will end up. There's this International Society for the Study of Information, which is where I think Jesse pointed this out this week, and it's unclear as to where, like, for the abstract deadline is May 15th. So I think if you want to present, that's
the
the
one I
deadline.
mentioned with Dan?
It could be.
Is that like, it was like, oh, I had a friend who mentioned want to be a co-author on something. Is that the one?
It may be,
Or is that
yeah.
not the same
Yeah,
one?
it could be that
I'm
one.
trying to find what you said.
Well, anyways, yeah, I think the deadline is, I'll have to be sure on this, but I think that would be a good home for the Gibsonian information work. And I'll share the link, the current draft with Angela on that. And I need to go back and work on that some more, and we need to work on it to get it, because I don't know, I mean, it's a little short now, so it might be, there's a lot more to add there. I think we're learning as we go along here. There's this, this is the thing I mentioned about the follow-up to the Embodied Intelligence Workshop. There's this Artificial Life special issue, and there's this Embodied Intelligence ebook. And they're different types of venues, but I suggest you submit an abstract to both of them to see where we get in. And so the abstract is due May 21st. So that, I think the abstract is just something very short, just an intent, like signaling our intent to submit a full paper. And then what I was thinking of is recycling the continual embodied learning paper with some of the things that we've been thinking about since A-Life submission time, which was like February, and then putting that into a paper that kind of walks through the approach, ties it very closely with the developmental AI stuff. And then that would be in one of these two venues. And then, we can draw from this paper for future studies. So if Rashad wants to do a empirical study on it where he generates some simulation data, then we can do that. We can base that on, this paper, and also the one that that's on the archive now on developmental Bratenberg vehicles. So we're kind of now building this literature on this topic. Then there's some of these other opportunities I don't think we're going to make. I'm not sure this is a good fit for lifelike computing systems, but for Gibsonian information, but I put that down as a possibility. I don't think that's necessarily something that'll work. But there's also this, I think Krishna mentioned that he wanted to do the positive feedback in AI paper and he wanted to submit it to NeurIPS. I'm not sure if that'll happen, but that's coming up. So that's, and then, so I don't know if there are any other, this application for interest groups thing for CogSci that's due on Monday, so I don't know if Jesse still wants to do that or.
Yes, I do want to do that. I have to kind of take care of that. Actually, let me look really quick. I have something to add to the list, but that's something I do want to do.
Okay.
Let me look at something really quick. Okay. Now I want to make sure, because I know you sent me a message with like the 4 or 5 deadlines, and that is the one that's due the 3rd. Okay, so I'm checking that. I have something to add to the list, but I didn't know if there was. You were asking another question first.
Oh no, that was it. That was the thing about the.
Okay, I'm gonna try to share my screen about it.
Okay, let me unshare mine.
Oh,
there we go.
Weird. Okay. Yes. Yes. All right. So here's the thing that I have a friend who, holy crap. This looks a little different than I did before. Okay, well, sorry, this is like now the whole page of stuff. I don't know why I started that. Somewhere in here, there's a conference that it's the one I'm looking for. Can I just, hold on a second here. Okay, here it is. I don't know what that was about. This information in biologically inspired cognitive architectures. This looks interesting. We could have sent some things here, perhaps. The short version is, I don't really know what some of these deadlines mean about expression. Like, I don't really know how relevant. I think it's just like gauging interest. But the deadline was originally May 15th and has been extended to all submissions of extended abstracts to June 15th. So, I think that's a good amount of time if we want to try to find something to do this. The thing that my friend Dan sent me was quite a basic abstract of, like, stuff.
Yeah.
About like something that I don't know if he saw our work on it, but it was kind of adjacent to like developmental AI, and it was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Not quite the same, but like based, it's kind of a generic bio-inspired thing.
Yeah.
But I think this conference might be interesting and potentially a place to get some of our stuff on there.
Yeah, I think the idea is that you express interest in it and then you give them the full article, like they do. It's like kind of like stepwise. They want to know who's involved, who wants to be involved, or if it's like particularly egregious as a submission, they say, "Oh, no, thank you."
Do you think it's too late to submit to them?
No, it looks like the deadline is. So it's like 300 to 500 words, 1 to 2 pages, or 1 to 2 pages. That seems like should be submitted to be published in the proceedings by May 15th or June 15th. So this is the one. I think here they're just asking for extended abstracts. They want to see if it's worth putting it into this issue. And so then I think the short versions of the paper are later, so that they're just trying to give you like a chance to sort of make it into the special issue, and then the special issue is due later. So it's like a process. I don't know if this is like, if you submit us an abstract, whether you can give a talk on it or what the deal is. But we should target June 15th with an abstract, maybe 1 to 2 pages, and then give them a longer paper later if they ask for it.
I think there's a lot of things in this interest, like how do biology-inspired systems deal with data. Even I would really like to see maybe with I just saw this for pedagogy as it relates to transmission and knowledge acquisition in BICA systems. There's a lot of things here that seem to be tangent or directly relevant to semiotics as studies symbolic information processing. Like that sounds really makes me think of Anson as well. So there's a whole lot of this interest list keeps. I was waiting for this topical area list to stop scrolling, but it's quite big. So
yeah,
it may be something we can target.
Yeah. Okay, so that's good. Let me kind of wrap up. I think Angela has to leave now, or so.
And it's going to go right now, actually.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
We'll be in touch on Slack and stuff for what you want to do. So thank you.
Yeah. So let's see. I'm not gonna get into any papers today. I think but I mean, we have a lot of things sort of in the queue. But we already kind of went over some papers, so that's not something we should delve into now. But yeah, let's keep an eye on the deadlines, and let's keep talking about some of this stuff. It's very good conversations here. And Anusha, if you're interested in something specific, let us know in the chat in one of the channels. Just where you could direct message me about like something that you're interested in, or Jesse. If there's what you're looking for, I guess, is like a hook, something that piques your interest, and then we can develop it from there as a topic.
Okay.
Great. Okay. Well, everyone have a good week, and we'll talk in Slack, and see everyone next week.
All right. Take care. See everybody.
All right, thanks. Take care.